that's one of the things they talk about in the Maslow's hierarchy, right? It was the need to be safe. It is primal to so much of life. And I do think while all the 7 desires are so important, if this one is not present and, kind of undergirding us, then it throws so much out of whack.
Welcome to the Faithful and True podcast. I'm Randy Everett, your co-host, and we're here again today with our host, Dr. Greg Miller. Greg, how you doing?
I'm doing well. It's a cold day in Chicago.
Well, it's a cold day in Minneapolis too, but that's not going to deter us from marching on with the podcast. And we're very lucky to have with us today Debbie Laaser and Beth Miller. So I believe you're familiar with both of them.
I am.
This ought to go smoothly. What we're going to do today is we're going to launch a new series of podcasts that we're quite excited about, and they're based around the principles of safety. And so we thought we would start it off with Debbie and Beth talking with Greg about safety for women who have been betrayed and other aspects of that principle. So Greg, go ahead and get us started.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the idea for this series of podcasts came from staff meetings where we were consistently raising the issue of safety, and we are aware of how often we talk to our clients about safety, how important it is. So it just made sense for us to set some time aside to really go after this in a more extended way. And so we are glad that Deb and Beth are with us. And since this is the first one, we're going to just start by talking a little bit about what safety is, what safety isn't, and why it is important. And, Deb, we can start with you because in the book that you and Mark wrote, The 7 Desires, you identified one of our basic desires is this desire to be safe. And so how did that come about for y'all? How did that conversation even begin?
Well, the book actually began when we began looking at all the issues that brought up arguments with couples. And when we started kind of dumbing them down to what was really the issue oftentimes was one that we would call a desire to be safe. And when we defined that, what we were saying was that it's really our desire to be free of anxiety and fear. The desire to know what's happening in our life so we're not surprised by things, that we know that we can take care of ourselves, that it won't be too dangerous, we'll be able to manage things. And when you think about it, this is a desire everybody has, both men and women, and children for sure. This is not just an adult thing. And right. in fact, it's such a primal desire because our bodies have been created by God in such a way that we have a system to help us respond to things that are dangerous and that would create fear in us. And thankfully, that's a really good thing that we carry around with us all the time, because there is danger in the world, and we want to be aware of when we need to do something to respond to that. So typically, when we're in a dangerous situation, we'll respond with that fight or flight or freeze situation. I've added another one myself, which is please, which is if we please somebody well enough, maybe they'll calm down and be safer for us so that we don't have to be so afraid.
Well, going along with the alliteration of fight, flight, freeze, we've heard the idea of fawn, which is very much what you're talking about, to placate or to please so that we can be safe given somebody else's reaction.
Right.
I know we don't prioritize the 7 desires, and this safety really does seem foundational, that if this isn't in place, it really is difficult to navigate any of the others, because like you said, our bodies were created to gravitate towards safety and to be alert when there is a threat or a perceived threat.
And when you think about it, I'm sorry, Beth, I'm kind of jumping on you.
No, you
But
go
when you think
ahead.
about
Yeah.
it, our desire to be safe covers so many things. I mean, it covers our desire to have enough money, for instance, to know that we'll be able to pay for things and take care of ourselves and pay for our homes that we're living in our apartments. It covers our health. When we have issues of health, that creates fear sometimes. When we think about the end of life or issues of death, we think of that. And probably one of the biggest issues of safety is the fear of being all alone. And that's why
Mhm.
abandoning situations where we are left are so scary for most of us, too. And so, safety covers so many things, and they are so basic, as you say, foundational to our life, that I know even some of our original psychologists talked about that as being one of the first things we need to attend to if we're going to help somebody.
Mhm. Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I was taken back to, freshman psychology class in college, where that's one of the things they talk about
Mhm.
in the Maslow's hierarchy, right? It was the need to be safe. It is primal to so much of life.
Mhm.
And I do think while all the seven desires are so important, if this one is not present and, kind of undergirding us, then it throws so much out of whack.
Mhm.
Well, and kind of the one of the ways I talk about safety is this idea that safety is the absence of a threat, either real or perceived. And so if I'm experiencing a real threat, kind of Deb, as you said, there's a physiological reaction that occurs that my body goes into to try to create safety. What's also true, though, is there doesn't have to be a threat. I can just perceive the threat and my body will go into the same reaction. And what's true, I think, is as children, the threats that we experience are real. And that's why we have the reactions that we do. But because of the real threats, later in life, we have a hypervigilant to threats. So we start to perceive threats where they may not be there.
Mhm.
And so it's this idea of safety is created when we aren't living in a circumstance where we feel like there is a threat or we perceive that there could be a threat.
Mhm. That's why it becomes important, I believe, Greg, that we look at someone's life story. Because really, as we look at stories and even very early life experiences, we begin to put together where, for some people, there are very many more threats or perceived threats than there are for others. And their
Mhm.
response, and therefore the anxiety they carry around in the memories of their own brains, is much different for some who have had many more experiences like that. If you've grown up in an environment where there has not been a lot of safety, maybe there is addiction issues there, or anger management issues, or abandoning issues, parents that aren't there for you when you're young. There are lots of things that develop that create this hypervigilance that you can carry along with you in your life as an adult. There's just some great research in our field. It's called the attachment theory, where there's been a lot of research for many years looking at children and how caregivers either provided for them a secure environment or did not, under the age of 5 primarily. And from those studies, they recognize that when a child was taken care of, was attended to, that needs were taken care of, that they ideally developed with what we would call a secure attachment. Or in other words, another way to say that is the child felt safe. There are many,
Mhm.
many children,
Mhm.
however, that don't have that kind of environment, and therefore different kinds of attachments develop. Some children learn to avoid a lot of situations to try to stay safe. Others try to move forward and get overly engaged with questions and presents and so forth to try to get needs met. We find as we're working with couples that those styles of attachment learned very early on in life play out in terms of how a marriage works, or oftentimes doesn't, especially when issues of safety arise.
Well, and what's true is because the safety is so foundational that when I perceive that there is a threat, I intuitively begin to try to create safety for myself. And some of the ways I try to create safety may be valid and legitimate, and other ways that I try to create safety may actually be harmful and destructive. But I intuitively know I need to be safe. And so, as a child, if I am not in a safe environment, I begin to create those systems that will create safety for myself. And it almost seems counterintuitive, but for that person who grew up in a safe environment, safety isn't as evident or as important. For the person who grew up in the unsafe environment, it becomes prioritized because I think they're trying to create something that was missing that was so foundational when they were young.
Mm-hmm.
And for those who are intrigued by Debbie bringing up attachment theories, if you go back through our archived podcast, you'll find a series of podcasts that our clinical director, Jim Farm, did while we still had Mark leading the podcast back in the Men of Valor program days. So if you want to learn more about attachment theories, there's more content to listen to going back through our podcast library.
Mm-hmm. And as we're kind of talking about, there's a variety of different ways to understand safety. And kind of what you've alluded to, Deb, is even self an examination of what do I do? What are some of the patterns? What are some of the things I do to create safety in my current experiences based upon my history?
Mm-hmm. One of the things Mark and I always talked about was that we can tell for ourselves when we're dealing with an issue of safety, because there is basically a tendency to want to control. And do you know how often when we're talking with couples, there is a complaint about one or the other of them is a very controlling person? When we hear that, we know that that is about anxiety. And anxiety is, again, about fear, and fear is about safety. So it very much connects to this desire. Once we can start examining that for ourselves, we may make some different choices about how we want to live life with that. I'll give my own personal example is when I was young, and even now, my mom is still alive. And, what I know is in my family, doing money well, being responsible around money was a very important thing. It spoke a lot to your character of being a responsible person and being able to take care of yourself. And so that became a very important need of mine. I did a great job, I thought, when I was a single person, but when I got married, Mark and I handled money differently. And in fact, the way I saw him handle it made me very nervous and fearful, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
And so, my way of, before we could talk about these issues, my way of trying to control that was to make sure every month all the bank statements were balanced to the penny. Everything had to be perfect there. And it was just that deep desire. I got to do this right, because this is what creates calm inside of me. So we all have those things. And when we can identify and own our own and share that with another person, we often get a lot more empathy from them than if we just show up with our behaviors. We tend to criticize how another person tries to control life to create safety for themselves.
Well, and one of the ways, kind of that along the lines of control, is many times obsessive behavior or thinking is a way to create safety. Getting overly focused on something. I'm aware within myself. We live in Chicago. We live in a condo building, and it's very important to me that the doors are locked, specifically at night. And many times, it's not just checking them once; it's checking them twice or three times, because I just need that reassurance that they are locked. And again, it's that sense of safety. I can feel secure, literally feel secure, if I know my doors are locked. So this idea of safety can show up in a broad range, and control can be one of them. Over focus can be another one of them. But we can have those patterns. Appearance can be another one of them. If things look good on the outside, then that can create a sense of safety. How clean my house is, how mowed my lawn is. But that sense of there is structure and order is another attempt to create safety. For you, Beth, how does safety show up, for you or with people that you work with?
Yeah. Well, one of the things I was just thinking is I think it's so important that we are really compassionate and kind with ourselves as we think about this issue, because whatever I've developed to create safety for myself when I was younger was probably necessary, right? I didn't have that framework at the time, but, you know, like for me, it was being very responsible. It was hustling to achieve a lot and to show up way early as in more of an adult capacity than a child ever should. So I think one of the things that is so helpful about these conversations is that we're invited to see, okay, what am I doing now as an adult? Am I still over functioning, which is exactly what that was when I was a child, right? Um, am I believing that my safety comes in being overly responsible? And when we don't examine those things, we sort of default, right, to what we knew to do to keep ourselves safe younger. And I think for those of you that are familiar with this construct that we talk about at Faithful and True, we talk about the idea of we have these parts of us, like our child part, our survivor part, and our wise adult. Well, some of these things we're talking about came out of our survivor, right? That this is how we learned, in fact, to survive. The redemptive piece of this is that as a wise adult, I get to ask the question, is that still serving me, right? Is that still the best way I want to be safe? Um, or do I have some choices of other ways I want to do that?
I think a great example of that is another way that safety can be created is through image management. If I look good, then I can be safe. And image management typically can lead to some level of deception, hiding, lying. And a
Mm-hmm.
lot of the men that come to our workshop, one of the things that has created the most chaos in their life is their tendency to be deceptive, to hide, to lie, to pretend. And it doesn't come out of this place of evil, it comes out of a desire to be safe. And typically, what you were saying, Beth, is somewhere in their story, whatever was true, either they perceived was a threat or truly was a threat. So they begin to learn to hide to create safety. Well, even if at one point that might have served me, what we know is as a wise adult, that hiding, lying, deception piece is no longer serving me, but is actually incredibly disruptive in our relationships. And that's what brings many of the men to the workshop is how much they've lied and hidden about what was
Mm-hmm.
going on for them sexually in their lives.
Yeah, which I would just say, and Deb, I would imagine, we're in sync with this. That right there is often the most chaotic part of the acting out for a spouse. And I'm not in any way minimizing, the sexual acting out and all the chaos that creates. And there is this fundamental belief, I think, when we enter into a marriage that there is safety there because there won't be deception, there won't be lying. And so when that happens, again, it speaks to this primal need, right? And that can be so, so devastating and take quite a bit of time to heal. I think that's why I end up having these conversations so much with women, because having to figure out how to create safety when those things have happened, when there's been deception or lying, can be really, really challenging.
Well, I am on the same.
Well, and
Oh,
even,
sorry, Greg. I was
oh,
going to
go
say
ahead,
I
Deb.
truly am on the same page as you are, Beth, about that, and the not telling the truth, lying, hiding, covering up in some ways. We have found has been way more painful than even the behaviors that are found out.
Yeah.
Not telling the truth
Yeah.
does create a lot of fear for any of us because the not knowing is what is so hard. I think as we begin to explore how early in life lying starts for many people, and we recognize, and even research will say that one of the major reasons kids start lying is because they have been punished more severely than they feel is appropriate for what happened. And isn't it something that a small child will start lying then about their behavior or what they've been accused of because they know that possibly what follows is a great amount of punishment.
Punishment.
Right? For others,
Yeah.
they're trying to live up to an image that their parents have of them. And so they lie about what they're doing or how well they're doing in school, or they change that F into an A before they bring the page home, because their whole image of who they are as a person will be scrutinized if they try to tell the truth. So it's a very, very old way of coping with a safety issue. And I think the more that we can help wives see that too, we hopefully can depersonalize that some. Now, I'm not saying it's not something we still don't want in our marriages. And will it be much more difficult for someone who has used that as a way to cope with safety for a long, long time to change than even the sexual behavior itself? That is a truth. It will be the much harder thing to change.
Well, and one of the things that we've talked about is when a couple is dealing with the same desire, in this case, the desire to be safe, but they're approaching it from different perspectives, that's where some of the most chaotic aspects of the relationship are. So in this case, the wife is believing safety is in truth. The husband believes safety is in hiding. They're both trying to create safety, but the approach is significantly different. And so at the end of the experience, nobody feels safe. And that's part of what creates the chaos. Part of what we work with men is to help them to understand you can be known and you can be safe, because safety doesn't come from your wife's reaction. As long as my safety is dependent upon how somebody responds to me, I am going to want to manage those outcomes. And part of what, for those of you that don't know, Beth and I are married. And what creates chaos is, the example from my own life is I grew up with this message basically that my mom was fragile and I had to protect my mom from the truth, that she really wasn't able to handle it. So there was this distorted message that if you love someone, you hide from them. Well, I loved Beth, and so I wanted to love her well by hiding from her, and she had a different understanding of love.
Yes, I did.
So we've done quite a bit of work.
How did that work out for you, as we say?
Yes, that's it. How's that
Not
going?
very well.
Well,
Yeah.
Beth,
Well,
Beth should feel very safe because Greg's locking the doors and windows 3 and 4 times a
Yeah,
night.
right.
So
yes, I do. Yeah.
So
Well,
part of it is understanding not just what we experienced growing up, but how what we experienced growing up we're bringing into our current circumstances. And those, we talk about core beliefs a lot. Those distorted core beliefs that we're still operating out of that are hurtful and destructive to others.
I think it's important also to recognize that we can change. And so it's not an excuse to say, well, I used that when I was young, and so therefore you're going to have to get used to it and feel safe with me, because the truth is we can change. Sometimes we're not going to do it perfectly. And for those of us who have had more pain in our life or lack of safety, and we have more ways that we have tried to manage that, it is going to be harder for sure. And we may need other elements of therapy or help in order to change brain chemistry that is locked on our response to something that we perceived or actually is dangerous. And that's why we're here as professionals, to help people change the things they want to change.
yeah,
Go ahead, Beth.
I was just going to say, I think we're learning so much more about the need to address our body as we're seeking to be safe people, right? And live in safety, because when our physiology is so stirred up and we're so activated, we've got to find ways for that physiology to calm down before we can be a safe person, right? Before we can even take an accurate assessment of whether a situation is safe. And I'm thankful that we're getting more body literate, if that makes sense. that, we're learning those things, that in order for us to feel a visceral sense of safety in our bodies, we've got to learn some ways, like you were saying, different therapeutic techniques and so forth to help us calm down.
Well, one thing that is true is it is God's desire for us to be safe. And so God created a physiological response to there being a threat. The problem, though, is if I am constantly living under a threat or a perceived threat, then I'm asking my body to do something that it was not created to do, and that is live in this constant hypervigilance. I know the first time I was introduced to that concept of hypervigilance, there was something in me that goes, wow, this just rings so true for how I have lived, where I'm constantly looking for that threat. And my body wasn't created to constantly be looking for threat and that hypervigilance. So eventually what was intended to be helpful and even to be create safety for me becomes something that is hurtful and destructive. So I have to learn to be wise in where are the legitimate threats that I need to be attentive to, and what are some historic messages I have about threats that no longer are accurate, that no longer are representative of what I'm actually experiencing.
One of the ways I like to talk about that, Greg, is to imagine ourselves with antennas up here. And, when we've been hurt in certain ways or our safety's been compromised, our antennas go up a little higher about more things. And some of us, live life with a lot of antennas up there, and lots of things are triggering us about safety. And so it's a hard way to live. It's hard on our bodies for sure. And I think a lot of times our physical symptoms are portraying how much of this hypervigilance or our antenna watching up here is taking over the energy that we ideally could be using for other more positive things in our life. So getting a handle on what that is one of the things we like to help people with. Again, we know it's possible to change. And we also know the body keeps the score from these really difficult things, don't we? From Bessel van der Kolk's wonderful book about that. Our memories drive us to continue to be hypervigilant unless we get very intentional about changing those things.
Well, we're coming to the end of our first podcast, and as we've said, this is going to be a series. There's so much that can be said about this issue of safety. It's so foundational. And each time I just want to leave with this message of hope that safety is possible. And safety comes through truth. It's the truth of who God is. It is the truth of who God has created me to be. Safety can't be dependent upon my circumstances because I can't always be in charge of my circumstances. So what I can know is that what transcends my circumstances is the truth of God. So we're going to continue this conversation, but just to leave us with this sense of hope that no matter what my circumstances are, there can be safety because there can be truth.
Thanks, Deb. Thanks, Beth, for joining us on the podcast today. We look forward to having you back soon to continue the conversation about safety. And to our listeners, we thank you for your loyalty and always coming and listening or viewing our video podcasts as well. We've been just recently reviewing the numbers that are rolling in, thanks to Aaron Wellman, our producer of the podcast and our director of social media. And we're just humbled by the great numbers that we see coming in. We'd like to invite you to visit we're about to launch a brand new Faithful and True website, which will be coming very, very soon. And we invite you to check that out. Also, for any men who is out there struggling with unwanted sexual behaviors that they're having trouble controlling, check out our Men's Journey workshop, which we have available every month here at Faithful and True. We also, on a quarterly basis, do the Women's Journey workshop, and we also do the Couples Journey workshop, which is very beneficial and helpful to couples. So thanks for joining us today, and we hope that this coming week is going to be a week for you that's filled with many blessings and great vision.